What you're about to hear is a true story from the Scientific Journal of Ophthalmology from 1921 by Dr. William Wilmer about his patient, only known as Mrs. H. Mrs. H and her husband, Mr. H, were a very wealthy family who moved with both their children and their servants to a new home in 1912. The home was built all the way back in 1870, so it was fairly old when they moved in, and because of that, the home was also a little run down. Not only was the house a little run down and just very old, it also came with no electricity, and Mrs. H described it as just unusually quiet. In fact, it was these aspects of the home that made Mr. H and Mrs. H feel just really down, really depressed, only a couple days after moving in. And as the family was settling into the house, strange things started happening. The first incident was Mrs. H hearing footsteps in the room above her when she was sitting in the house one day. She rushed upstairs, believing that someone was there or that it was a servant up there when they weren't supposed to be, and she found no one. In fact, she searched the entire wing, the entire section of that house, and there was no one there. She was alone. In the following weeks, Mrs. H started to feel just yucky. Not only was she already depressed, but she started to have headaches, dizziness, and weakness. She was so tired. She tried iron supplements and that didn't work. She tried napping hours throughout the day and that didn't work either. Her symptoms never weaned, and in fact, after a nap, she felt like her headache was worse than when she went to sleep. Mr. H, the patriarch of the house, really enjoyed eating some fruit before he went to bed. He liked to sit in the dining room and eat fruit at the table. Well, one night, again, soon after moving in, he felt a presence. He felt like something was watching him, almost like something was almost right over his shoulder watching him. And it got so bad and so weird feeling that he had to turn around in his chair so he could face the entire room and make sure no one was there. The children were also not doing great. They didn't want to eat. They didn't want to play that much. And the entire family just felt so fatigued and often really unusually cold. Like they had to put blankets on themselves and extra socks all the time. December came around, and as the holidays approached, Mrs. H decided to take their children away from the house for a few days. They were going to go on a little vacation with just her and the children. Mr. H was going to stay behind. As his family left for their little getaway, Mr. H continued to experience weird things. He'd wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of a bell. Sometimes he thought it was the telephone, other times he thought that it was the door. On another night, Mr. H heard a fire truck with its sirens on, bustling up the road. So much so that it woke him up. He got out of bed to look out the window, only to find that there was nothing there. The streets were completely empty. The children and Mrs. H returned from their vacation feeling a lot better. As they got out of the house, their spirits lifted. The depression had weaned, their headaches went away, to the point where they were actually excited to come home and settle down again. But pretty much right when they got home, all the stuff started back up again. And again, they just started to feel doom and gloom. The family would hear more footsteps, doors slamming, pots and pans banging in the kitchen. And Mr. and Mrs. H were now sure that their house was haunted, especially because soon they'd all start to see actual ghosts. On 3 separate occasions, Mrs. H saw the same ghostly figure. It was a woman dressed in black, and she had long, dark hair. Mrs. H would approach the woman to try to figure out what the hell it was, but when she did, the figure would disappear, and Mrs. H would be left with her own reflection in a mirror, realizing that it was her reflection the whole time. But she could have sworn she saw a ghost. On another occasion, Mr. H woke up in the middle of the night, feeling as if someone was on top of him and trying to strangle him. He was so scared he woke up in a complete coughing fit, thinking almost that it was his wife or something who had either gone mad or was playing a prank on him. But when he looked over, his wife was sound asleep next to him in bed. He also looked around to make sure that there weren't intruders in the house that could have been doing this. But again, there wasn't. And he finally concluded that it must have been an awful dream, and he went back to sleep. Finally, one morning, one of the nurses that worked for the family was sitting down to breakfast with Mrs. H, and she finally confided in Mrs. H that she thought the house was haunted too. The staff, it turns out, were experiencing very similar things in the house. Some of the staff slept in the house where the family was to work for them, and they would experience their beds shaking at night and not stopping, something creeping over them at night and staring over their body. Sometimes they'd feel the blankets be yanked off of them in bed, and so on. Turns out the staff had been experiencing these things and have been worried about it for a while and even made Mr. H aware of it, but they didn't want to stress out Mrs. H. They didn't want to bring it to her and freak her out and worry her when she had already been feeling so ill, and they knew that it would stress her out. But finally, they couldn't take it anymore. They had to tell her. Things only got worse from there when Mr. and Mrs. H were finally able to look up some of the history about the house. They found out that families that had been living in that house previously had experienced very similar hauntings and literally thought that there was a ghost or ghosts in that house. And when they found out that previous families were experiencing the same thing, that just confirmed their beliefs that the house must be haunted. Now, some of you might be on to me by now, but if you haven't already guessed how this story ends, turns out the house was not haunted at all. We're going to interrupt the story really quick to thank today's sponsor, but I'll be right back with you. Thank you to Secret Puzzle Society for sponsoring today's video. Let me introduce you guys to your new obsession. Secret Puzzle Society is not your normal match 3 game. Help our protagonist, Brooke, uncover the secrets of a mysterious society by going on a match 3 adventure. Investigate tons of beautiful escape rooms that are packed with puzzles and challenges that you need to solve in order to progress through the game and through the story. Brooke's goal is to uncover who this secret society truly is and exactly what their plans are. But she needs your help. The super engaging story within the game will keep you guessing with plot twists that you're just not going to see coming. I loved being introduced to this very intriguing character named Red Raven. He's charismatic, but also very strange and mysterious at the same time. Like, I have no clue if I should be rooting for him or not. I don't know. I don't trust him, don't get me wrong, but I also really like him at the same time, you know? He kind of slays for that. Secret Puzzle Society is also just beautiful to look at. The graphics are crisp and vibrant. I love exploring the different room designs. The game also has no ad interruptions or pop-ups, which ensures a smooth, stress-free gameplay experience. But honestly, be careful because this game is hard to put down. As you saw, it's right next to me, and I might be taking little breaks while filming today to get a quick round in. I highly recommend that you download this game today and give it a try for yourself. It's completely free to download, so you have nothing to lose. Use the QR code on the screen right now to download the game on your device, or you can click the link right below this video in the description and the pinned comment. Thank you so much to Secret Puzzle Society for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back into it. That's right, the house was not haunted. The entire family, rather, was suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning. It was actually Mr. H's brother, so Mrs. H's brother-in-law, that finally suggested that perhaps the entire family was being slowly poisoned. Maybe not necessarily carbon monoxide, but somebody was poisoning them. As we said at the beginning, this house was old, which is often attributed to hauntings, but it can also be attributed to the appliances in the house not being properly installed. Sure enough, they inspected everything in the house and found that the furnace that warmed the house up was not properly installed. The vents to the furnace were not placed properly, and because of that, the furnace was emitting very low dose, but a dose nonetheless, of carbon monoxide right into all the family's bedrooms. Shortly after, the H family moved out of the house, and all of their symptoms improved and they never had a haunting again. Now, how many haunted house stories have you heard over the years that could possibly be attributed to carbon monoxide rather than ghosts? All of the symptoms of a haunting literally line up perfectly. This family had the classic things moving around, the doors slamming, footsteps, but they were literally seeing ghosts. And it turns out that carbon monoxide not only makes people very sick, but can cause hallucinations and delusions and lots of other shit. So let's talk about this terrifying silent killer today, shall we? Carbon monoxide is often abbreviated to CO. So if I say CO in this video, that's what I'm referring to. And understand, carbon monoxide is a gas. It's incredibly useful, as it turns out, and a lot of us actually use it daily. Gas-based furnaces, portable generators when the power goes out, charcoal grills, gas cars, and even some appliances produce CO. But carbon monoxide, while incredibly useful, is also crazy poisonous. When these household appliances are not used properly, or if they malfunction in any way and somebody doesn't catch it, or if they don't have an alarm, they can emit very low or sometimes high levels of CO into your home or wherever you are. And it can make people extremely sick, but can cause death in many cases. The reason that it's so dangerous is because you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. So if you have appliances in your home that use gas and you also don't have a CO detector, sometimes there's a leak without anybody realizing. If the leak is bad and the concentration in the home is bad enough, it can kill a person or an entire family within minutes. If it's a slower leak, you'll just get really sick. Headaches and dizziness are the most common symptom, but you may also feel nauseous and even vomit. But you may also experience confusion, dizziness, chest pain, and, you guessed it, hallucinations and delusions. But the problem is that a lot of the time, CO poisoning just presents as flu-like symptoms. And so when the whole family gets sick around the same time, a lot of people don't catch that it may be CO because the symptoms mimic the flu so closely, they think that a virus is just going through the house. And unfortunately, carbon monoxide poisoning is not as rare as it should be. According to the CDC, in only the USA, about 400 people die every single year from CO poisoning. And that does not include fire-related deaths. But more than 100,000 people in the US every year will go to the emergency room because they suspect CO poisoning. Now let's first dive into the most famous Reddit carbon monoxide poisoning story. I have talked about this before, but it was years ago, and I really want to talk about it again since this is a CO specific video. It's also just objectively one of the most fascinating solved Reddit mysteries of all time. So the post read, "Post-it notes left in apartment. On the 15th of April, I found a yellow post-it note in handwriting that wasn't mine on my desk, reminding me of some errands I had to do, but told literally nobody about. While odd, I chalked it up to something I did in my sleep, thinking maybe in my half-awake state, I scrawled it so it didn't appear to be my handwriting. I threw it out and thought little of it. On the 19th, I found another post-it note on the back of my desk chair in the same handwriting as the previous note, telling me to make sure that I, quote, saved my documents. I was freaked out, but there was no signs of a break-in, so I set up a webcam in my house, aimed at my desk, and used a security cam app for it to record after detecting movement. On the 28th, I woke up to find another post-it note, this one saying our landlord isn't letting me talk to you, but it's important we do. I immediately checked the webcams folder on my computer and found nothing from the night before, but my computer's recycling bin had been empty, which I am certain I did not do recently, indicating that someone had noticed the webcam and deleted the files. They were just saved straight into the folder on my desktop called webcam. Today, on the 1st of May, I found another post-it note, this time on the outside of my door with nothing written on it, and there were also appeared to be post-it notes on many other doors in my apartment complex, all blank in varying colors. Do I have any legal recourse here? I have no proof except for the post-its, but these are written by my pen and on my post-it notes, so conceivably I could have faked them. Would contacting the police get me into any trouble if they can't determine an outside source for this? I just want to make sure I'm not wasting anyone's time. Should I consult my landlord? Those also living in the complex? Edit, I pulled up a letter I received from my landlord back when I moved in and the handwriting is identical. Could this count as evidence? Naturally, a lot of people were wondering if maybe this person was suffering from some sort of mental health episode. It was either that or this post was probably fake. But another user named Kakerlak went on to make a few suggestions, and among their suggestions was this. Or it might be a physical problem. You mentioned that you have a very unusually narrow bedroom with no windows. Is there a chance that you're not getting enough ventilation when you sleep, or that there is a carbon monoxide leak in the building? A cheap CO detector, which you should have anyway, is a fast way to find out. You'd also have really bad headaches. And OP replied that they were in fact having headaches. And they actually also happened to have a CO detector, but they had never turned it on. They then made an updated post explaining that this was solved. The landlord not only was never stalking them, never breaking into their home, but they had a low CO leak, and it was causing OP to write these notes, post them around their apartment, and then forget that they ever wrote them. It is also incredible that somebody in the comments was able to come up with that just based off of remembering that OP didn't have any windows, and that this might have been a possibility, and it might have been exacerbated by not having any ventilation. So thankfully, that is a carbon monoxide story that had a happy ending. This next story, unfortunately, does not. In May of 2019, a family of 4 and their 3 dogs all died from CO poisoning. 50-year-old Richard Redder, his wife, 49-year-old Jennifer, along with their son, who was 15 years old, his name was Richard IV, and their 13-year-old daughter, Grace. They all went to bed on May 2nd and just didn't wake up. A relative of the family had last talked to them on April 29th, and the family had even mentioned to this relative that they were all feeling pretty sick. The classic thinking that a flu was going through their house. But in the following days, the relative tried to contact the family again and didn't get a response from anyone. This went on for like 3 days, and so the relative finally contacted authorities to see if they could go do a wellness check. When the authorities arrived, they had found that all 4 members of the family and their 3 dogs had all passed away. The cause of the poisoning was from a tankless water heater that Richard, the dad, had installed himself. The family also had no CO detectors in the entire house, which could have saved their lives. However, in their defense, that tankless water heater never should have been sold to them in the first place. It was way too complicated to install, and it had to be installed just right in order for it to be safe. And so the company that sold it never should have been selling it to people outside of actual technicians and plumbers who know how to do those things properly. It's still just so sad to think that a $30 CO detector could have saved all of these lives though. And in a perfect world, it would have been a red flag that the whole family felt sick days before. Now let's switch gears to Mexico City. In the fall of 2022, 3 friends, Jordan Marshall, Cortez Hall, and Candace Florence, were found dead in an apartment in Mexico that they rented through Airbnb. This is another really sad case because it could have been prevented. Cadence had called her boyfriend back home shortly after arriving at the Airbnb and told him that she felt really dizzy and that her legs were wobbly, like it was hard to walk. Of course, the couple just thought maybe she wasn't feeling well from travel, as she had traveled all the way from Virginia. Shortly afterwards, though, the security guards at the apartment building were investigating a weird gas smell that they had found, and they were looking for the source of it when they went into their apartment and found all 3 people dead. And I know that CO is odorless, so that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it turns out that the gas boiler in the apartment was leaking not only gas, but also carbon monoxide, so that's where the smell was coming from, but it was enough carbon monoxide to kill all 3 people as well. And their autopsies confirmed this. Airbnbs, above all, I do not trust to have properly installed CO detectors. Some of them aren't even required to put them in. I don't personally like Airbnbs that much, but my friends all do. I'm a hotel girly myself, but my friends like staying in Airbnbs sometimes, so I'll go with them. And I always have a portable detector that I can just plug into the wall in my bedroom. You can buy a portable CO detector on Amazon. I'll link the one that I have down below if you want to buy that particular one, but no pressure. You can just go on Amazon and find whichever one works for you. But I highly recommend that not only people make sure their CO detectors are working in their homes, but that they have a travel one too that they can take with them, because even if the Airbnb or the hotel has one, I still don't trust it. I know that sounds very paranoid, but I would rather have another one and just plug in my own too. Now, of course, in this case, it was not their fault. They should have been able to trust Airbnb and trust the hosts to keep them safe, especially when they were staying in their home. But again, it's just so tragic to think about how a stupid little device could have saved all their lives. Now we're going to April 2013 in Boone, North Carolina. At the Best Western Plus Blue Ridge Plaza Hotel, an elderly couple, Daryl and Shirley Jenkins, 73 and 72 respectively, were staying in room 225 and they had mysteriously passed away, both at the same time. The couple's deaths were simply labeled as undetermined at first. Just days after Daryl and Shirley passed away, there was a group of young teenage girls staying in the room above 225, so not in that room, but nearby it on the floor above, and they were celebrating their friend's 13th birthday party. Shortly after arriving at the hotel, all of the girls felt extremely sick, and the parents that were with them were very confused, wondering if it was the pizza they ate or something like that, but they complained to hotel staff on like 3 different occasions. According to one of the parents, the hotel staff were like, okay, like they didn't even think anything of it or care whatsoever or think to investigate or look into it further. And the parents nor the party were told about the elderly couple dying in a nearby room just days prior. The hotel did not have CO detectors in any of the room, and that's because North Carolina doesn't require hotels to have CO detectors for some reason. But here's a terrifying fact for you. Only 14 states in the United States actually require that hotels install CO detectors, which is just the stupidest thing I have ever heard in my entire life. The liability alone, not counting the fact that then you are easily putting your guests in danger. It doesn't make any sense to me. I know that a lot of you are going to be thinking, well, the reason it's not required is because a lot of hotels don't have gas appliances. A lot of them are run on electric only, which I understand that, but you are going to find in this case that it was actually coming from the pool. I will talk about that later. So even if it was all electric in the hotels, there was still CO running in the pool room, which is how this tragedy happened. And I would also like to point out that a lot of people don't know the dangers of some gas appliances, and so it still makes no sense to me that even if the hotel didn't have any CO or gas running in the rooms, what if a guest still brought in a tiny grill or a little camping grill or a camping cooking device into their room, not realizing that it had CO in it, and a detector would still be able to save their life at that point. It just still seems really dumb to not have them when they're so cheap to install and so easy to just have, just in case, even if it's a minute risk. So yeah, okay, that's all I wanted to say. Back to me. But regardless, the girls ended up leaving. Thankfully, none of the girls passed away or got so ill they had to go to the hospital, as far as I know. But the hotel, again, didn't do shit about it. A little less than 6 weeks later, toxicology reports for the elderly couple finally came back, and it was discovered by the medical examiner that they had in fact passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning. But for some reason, the medical examiner's office did not make these results public and didn't even tell the hotel where the couple died, so they continued to not do anything about it. And then another boy dies. In June of that same year, an 11-year-old boy died in room 225, the same one where the elderly couple had died. Jeffrey Williams was staying there with his mother, and she was also poisoned, but she survived. She was rushed to the hospital and thankfully made a recovery. The only cause of death that they could find for the 11-year-old initially was asphyxia. And of course, rumors in the town ran rampant because now 3 people have died in the exact same hotel room in just the last couple of months. It led to conspiracy theories and some paranormal theories, but the fact that the mom was sick and also went to the hospital was a huge red flag, and they finally figured it out. They tested room 225, and sure enough, there was a massive CO leak. Turns out that the hotel's pool was leaking CO from the floor below room 225, and it was leaking into that room and other rooms in the hotel. The leak wasn't as bad in some of the other rooms, which would explain why the girls all got sick, but none of them lost their lives, thankfully. But room 225 was definitely the worst of it. It's actually just so insane to me that 2 people die in a hotel room. I don't care how old they are. The fact that they die at the same time on the same night is suspicious as hell. And the fact that they still just put people in that room without getting a definitive answer of what happened is mind-blowing to me. And, you know, money though. One of the most dangerous times for CO poisoning though is in the winter. The cold months, right? Obviously, because when it gets cold, people turn on their heaters and they often have to use generators more often because the power's more likely to go out in the winter months. But also a big risk for CO poisoning in the winter is cars, because often in a snowstorm, your tailpipe will get clogged and people will turn on the car for heat and not realize what they're doing. In a snowstorm in January of 2016, for example, a New Jersey mom with her 2 children passed away in this exact manner. 23-year-old Sasha Lynn Rosa, her 1-year-old son Messiah both died in their car, not realizing that the tailpipe was covered and clogged with snow. Sasha Lynn's 3-year-old daughter Sanaya was also in the car and initially survived, but unfortunately also passed away a few days later in the hospital. The most tragic part of this entire story is that they weren't even stranded somewhere and like fell asleep not realizing or anything like that. Sasha Lynn's partner was right outside of the car because he was shoveling snow away from the car because they wanted to get out of their driveway. They were leaving the house. They were going to go somewhere as a family because they had been huddled up in the house for days because of the snowstorm, and it was so cold outside, but they were all bundled up. So mom got in the car with the kids because they were just too cold to stay outside while the snow was being shoveled away from the car because there was literally too much snow to leave. And so dad was the one outside of the car shoveling the snow away. The parents turned on the car to turn on the heat for the kiddos while they were waiting for their dad to shovel away the snow. But nobody realized that the tailpipe was clogged. Dad was out of the car for 10 minutes. And by the time dad checked on them, like 10, 11 minutes later, his entire family was gone. This would make sense because the carbon monoxide was really concentrated because a car is such a small space. And I think a lot of the times when it's a lower leak or a bigger space, people start to get headaches first. So they have a chance of realizing what might be happening, that it might be CO and that they're not actually sick. But in this case, I believe that it happens so fast and you don't have time to get those warning symptoms. You just kind of pass out. Now, we could not complete this video without going over some basic safety tips, especially as the winter months are coming, because the truth is these tragedies and super disturbing events are 100% preventable. I'll leave a link in the description to the CDC's, their full list of all of their detailed tips, but here are the biggest and most important ones. Obviously, make sure you have CO detectors in your home, especially if you have a furnace or a stove that runs with gas, etc., etc. Make sure they are close to every sleeping area. Make sure they have backup batteries so they're plugged in electronically, but they have batteries as a backup so they will go off even if the power is out. And also, as we talked about, make sure that you have a portable one that you can take with you while traveling. Detectors are definitely the #1 way to save lives. The only time that they're not super helpful is with any car situation with the tailpipe. The CDC also recommends that you have all gas appliances in your home serviced frequently, as much as once a year by a professional, so they can look over your appliances and ensure that everything is on the up and up and that there's no risk of leaks. And I know this last one sounds very obvious to a lot of people, but please bear with me because there's a lot of people, especially when English is their second language, and sometimes when the instruction manuals for random devices don't have their language, people often miss this. Never, ever, ever use anything with charcoal or portable generators inside the house. Never use a grill inside the house either. I know, again, that sounds obvious, but it's not to everybody, and many deaths have happened this way. Camping stoves, any device like that, double check that it doesn't use gas before you use it inside. Make sure that it specifically says it's safe to use inside and check all the warning labels. Obviously, don't turn the car on in a closed garage. Turn all of these things on outside, outdoors only. They need a lot of ventilation to ensure that CO doesn't build up. And that means not just putting them in the house and opening all the windows either. Like that can also be dangerous. Obviously, if there's already a leak or poisoning, you turn off the appliance and open all the windows and get out of the house as quickly as you can and call emergency services. But in order to prevent it, don't put them in the house in the first place. Okay, so that was today's video. I thought it would be appropriate as the holidays come up. And I also just find CO poisoning very fascinating because it's so terrifying and it's so common at the same time. Like a lot of the really scary things in life are at least rare. Like we've talked about rabies on this channel or brain-eating amoeba and things like that. But stuff like this is so commonly used. So I find stories about it fascinating, but also a great thing to talk about more because some people just don't know the safety risks. If you're still watching at this point, thank you so much for making it to the end. Please like the video because it is a easy, free way to help the channel a whole lot. I appreciate you guys so much. And don't forget our merch, which is this design. It's still for sale. That'll be below as well. And I will see you all in the next one. Thank you so much to all the patrons on the screen right now. And okay, goodbye.